The recording has started, so we'll start off. Do you have any questions before we get into the group presentations? Anyone have a question? All right, and we'll start right with the group presentations, and we are talking about case study 3. And group 4, I believe you asked to go first. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Let me share my screen. All right. Is my screen shared correctly?
Yes, I can see your screen.
All right. So we were addressing the consideration was the principal's comments that a veiled threat. And, you know, we chose the picture, yes, no, maybe, because the way it was worded, our group had a discussion on, well, it didn't seem like a threat. And then you go back and you say, but the way she said it and the context she said it in could come across as a veiled threat. So we went both directions with it back and forth to decide how we were going to label that piece. I personally thought it was a veiled threat, where Anthony and Alan come across at first on the other side of that spectrum.
Correct. And a major part of the belief of why it was not a threat is at one point in time, it mentions that the principal recommends to these students that they hold off on their relationship till post-graduation. And though that's clearly an unethical and unrealistic request, we could ultimately argue that that is the principal looking out for the well-being of those students. So that would be the argument, saying that it would not be a threat in that instance.
And then on the other end, you know, the implication of there could be trouble, the way she expressed that kind of implied that she wasn't going to directly intervene if there were issues that come across because of their open relationship. It made it almost seem as if she was just giving them a heads up, hey, you're going to have an issue and I'm not really going to help prevent it.
Okay.
In addition to Brian and Anthony's comments, as Brian stated at the start, I was, you know, thinking it was not so much a threat. However, talking to Brian and talking about it as a group, I can see both sides of the issue here. With, you know, it is a threat, it's not a threat. But the bottom line is that the principal was taking a non-confrontational approach. I feel like she's trying to avoid the situation by just trying to push it off, to tell them to hold their relationship or whatever. So that's my take on the situation.
From there, we looked at what were the principal's responsibilities under the law, and there are multiple things that protect LGBTQ students legally. One of the first ones is Title IX, and that has been expanded a lot in the last few years. 2016, there was a change in the letter of guidance by the Department of Education, but that does not change the fact that legally that group of students is protected, because Title IX doesn't care what your gender or gender identity was, what your sex was, especially in cases of things like harassment and sexual violence. Doesn't matter who the victim was or who the aggressor was in that situation. As you can see, we've posted the Cornell legal definition of what Title IX is for reference for anybody that wasn't familiar with it.
Also, the LGBT students and all students are protected under the First Amendment, which allows them the freedom to express themselves, which we'll get into in just a second as far as the public display of affection. So they do have the right to, you know, express themselves by attending prom together, which we'll get to in just a few minutes. But they are protected under that freedom of expression under the First Amendment of the Constitution.
Beyond that, we still have the issue of the 14th Amendment, where clearly every single citizen in America born on American soil is under the complete jurisdiction of the U.S. Constitution, and therefore has all rights that any citizen would have. In this instance, trying to limit these two students' rights because of their sexual orientation can be viewed as a complete violation of Title IX, Amendment 1, and in this instance, the 14th Amendment. And the Equal Access Act of 1984 basically is the 14th and First Amendment just combined, saying that regardless of religion, philosophical views, all these different things, you still cannot restrict students from specific rights that are
All right, so how should the principal respond to the concerns? We as a group agreed that they should have there's notification to the parents, should have been involved. However, we, can't limit those kids because someone may be offended. Like, I mean, I've heard it put best, reality is you have the right to be offended, but that doesn't give you any right to limit other people's right to exist or, participate. So that's a big part of how we looked at the notification piece.
Right. So the principal should definitely notify the concerned parents, the parents that express concerns about these two individuals and their relationship, about the protections they have under the federal law, and that they should also inform the parents that any aggressive type of speech or any type of negative communication to any student at the school would never be tolerated, which leads right into a quote that Anthony got from the text.
Yeah, and clearly that quote basically just identifies one thing. While I was doing the research, I came across is this phrase called a heckler's veto, where you ultimately give in to the concerns of a few minority group because you're afraid of them making more of an issue out of it. And in this instance, that would be suppression for the sole reason that somebody might be offended. And because of that, we run into a major issue there.
All right, so should she have allowed them to go to the prom as a couple? We all personally said yes. At my school last year alone, we had several couples that were LGBTQ at the prom, and it was not an issue at all. I don't think anyone would have even dreamed of making it an issue, which was kind of a unique thing. And then Anthony and Alan have the Supreme Court ruling and the caseload that actually codified it into law and clarified some of those cases.
Yeah, so under this Supreme Court ruling, that these students will be allowed to attend prom. We cannot, tell them they cannot just because of their sexual orientation. But just to take a step back for a second, I'm not sure if Brian hit it on the last slide, but about the PDA piece, the parents that were concerned should also be told that, PDA is a board policy. It's not allowed, period, no matter the sexual orientation of the individual. So that way, that'll kind of nip that right where it's at, so they won't have any issues, which leads to the freedom of them attending prom together. And Anthony, you can explain that ruling.
Yeah, and again, that ruling goes back to the mention I said earlier of the heckler's veto, where ultimately these students have the constitutional right to this event, and prohibiting them from going because of their sexual orientation, as we've already identified, is a direct violation of multiple things. So if you are to ultimately give in to that demand as a principal, then ultimately you are giving into that heckler's veto, violating somebody's rights because someone else might be offended. You got a problem there regardless.
And the way she approached the whole picture, as Alan pointed out, as passive, those kids did ask to create an organization on campus, and all of these laws shield and protect them from that as well. So all around, her approach to this problem was terrible, from our group perspective. she really didn't follow her responsibilities. She didn't follow the guiding legal principles, and she just kind of tried to push them on out the door and act as if, the whole thing didn't happen to make a few parents happy, instead of having to address it. Instead of saying, no, these students have a right. These students are a part of our community and they're welcome. We're not going to tell them no simply because you find it uncomfortable. And, it goes all back to that when they want to give religious, it's separation of church and state. It's a huge founding principle of our country. So she should have taken a more assertive approach and said, I'm sorry, but we can't bar them for those reasons. It's not legally allowed, and moved on with it.
And as Alan mentioned earlier, she should have immediately defended those students when the parents started using that hate speech. The principal's job is ultimately the safety and well-being of the students, and any adult, any student who speaks of another student or whatever the case may be in that manner, that will never, ever be tolerated. That cannot be tolerated. And not doing something right then and there kind of sets the tone for how everything else will be handled.
And with that, any questions, comments, concerns?
Anybody have any questions for them? Okay.
And then finally, for those that were curious, our references from where we got things. Let me see.
You were very thorough. You did a good job with that.
Thank you.
All right, group 3. Who's going to take the lead on that one?
I'll take the lead.
Whitney's doing that one.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
So Tisha is not able to come. She had a family emergency. So we are taking over hers for her. So the first question was, would you consider the comments a veiled threat? And we kind of agreed with group 4. We didn't really see it as a threat, but as a genuine concern for the students, and trying to avoid conflict for them. But they didn't agree. For those that didn't agree with the students going to prom as a couple, we thought that she stated her recommendation, but not really having any consequences with that. And the second question, what are Mary Lou's responsibilities under the law? And we said that according to law, she must uphold the constitutional rights of her students if their freedom of expression and speech does not cause a clear and present danger or threaten material disruption of the education process. And I think, David, you had something to add to that?
Yeah, and it was a follow-up on what the group 4 has said, that with the laws dealing with the constitutional rights, we agree with the 14th Amendment that those that the way the laws were, that we agree with with group 4, pretty much the same. We also had looked into with that Frick and Lynch in 1980. We thought that case was kind of similar to the case that we had to look up as well, and we documented that as well, as far as the what are responsibilities under the law are concerned. Pretty much what group 4 said, pretty much.
This one was kind of, I don't know who had this one, but this one may have been out of order a little bit, and it may not really supposed to have addressed it, but we talked about how the students were asking to form a day of diversity, and what we said was that, they can, if we allow them to do that, then we're going to allow everybody else to do the same thing. And I think it was down in let's see, I think it was the court had held that the school that permits the advocacy of the rights of homosexual students cannot silence the views of students who hold a different view. And we said that maybe they can hold their club activities after school, and that as a school we can promote acceptance, but that as far as having a day of just total silence, that we felt like that was a material disruption of 2 days, because they were doing that and having another activity another day of activities. And it's not to be prejudiced or anything against them. It's just that if they do that, then everyone else is going to have we have to allow everyone else to do the same thing.
And you are correct on that.
I had how should Mary and Lou respond to the concerns of Jerry and Cindy Hudson? We also talk about the heckler veto and described that it's something that Mary Lou probably needed to consider when responding to the parents. A heckler's veto takes away the rights of the speaker and gives greater power to anyone who may be offended by the speech. This is important in the case because the administrator must determine whether the student's speech or actions have caused the potential to cause a disruption at the school, or as is the potential actual disruption, to follow the speaker or those who are creating this disruption. Okay, we thought that was important. Student speech or actions cannot be suppressed only because someone may be offended and cause an outburst in response. On the other hand, we also talked about maybe the principal need to address the parents with the usage of the word when she used fag and remind them that it's our language, that it's not allowed in a school setting or by the students, and you can be suspended from that aspect if the students were speaking that type of language. She needs to know the law well and remind the parents that even though the couples are going to the prom, it's against their religious beliefs, it is not a legal obligation to uphold the constitutional right for freedom of expression. She also needs to point out that the prom does not take place during the school day. Therefore, the couples are not causing a disruption to the educational process and that they are not causing any physical harm to others. However, the parent's behavior is indeed going to cause more trouble by leading a boycott. She needs to consult with the officials who know how to handle this if just in case of a boycott. And just to add on with that, we thought that if she did have a meeting and obviously to address the concerns and maybe educate the parents and the public on the laws, if she would have a meeting, maybe educate them on the laws when it comes to, the certain rights that the students have. And then if the con with that, if they would have had a boycott, it might not be good for the whole student body, things of that nature. And obviously it could bring a lawsuit if she was to kind of follow up on that. So that's how we kind of felt that maybe how she should respond to the Hudsons.
We did feel that they should be able to go to the prom as a couple. Like group 4, we thought kind of the same thing. It's about being offensive to some people, but that's more of a religious belief, and people should be able to be offended or not. Their intent must be considered. If they are okay attending together, not starting any kind of protest or causing any harm to others, they should be able to be held to the same standards as other students. If other couples are not supposed to display affection through kissing or anything like that, then they should not as well. We kind of felt like also that kind of more the parents that were causing more of the uproar than the students, as far as bringing it up to the principal and the school.
This just continues the case about should they be allowed to attend. And then in this case study, the principal had a fear of harm to the students, which in this case was the couple. However, the principal must consider whether telling the couple they could not attend prom will constitute an arbitrary infringement of constitutional protected rights, since unsubstantiated fear and apprehension of disturbance are not sufficient grounds to restrict the right of freedom of expression and should should not be the basis for the development of standards, and that was on page 123 in Chapter 5. According to Chapter 5 on 124, it says some risk management. It gave some risk management suggestions, and they were to ensure that the decisions they made were not arbitrary, capricious, or indefensible. And in this case, they would have been indefensible for sure. Prohibition of particular form of expression requires more than a desire to avoid unpleasantness associated with an unpopular view. In this case, it was West Virginia. This is intention of the person who's expressing themselves, and this was just a court case that that we saw with the West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett in 1943. The Supreme Court ruled that students was not required to salute the flag because it was a symbolic expression. The court stated that some considerations must be given to the intentions of the person who are expressing themselves. So we were looking at this particular one, even though it's a different case, at the intention of the person expressing themselves. And if we apply this to this case, the couple did not have any intention of threatening a material disruption, which we keep coming back to that material disruption and threatening, threatening any harm. And so they had no intent of doing either one. And this is just kind of continues on with that about free speech. It does not present a clear and present danger or threaten a material disruption. And that goes back to the Tinker versus Des Moines case. And in the event students' activities threaten the effective operation of the school, the principals are given a clear authority to limit or ban student activities. So if there was a situation that was causing an uproar in the school to the point that there was a fear of, that they were raising some kind of, or they were just trying to start something just to be starting it, then the principal would have a clear authority to stop it or ban it.
The Tinker versus Des Moines case is one that has been in many, many law books as sort of a landmark case that you will hear it referred to a lot. So it's good that you found that and that you included that.
That just adds to it, saying that the Supreme Court declared that students are persons who must be given all the rights and protections, especially their right to freedom of expression. They stated that the school board's fear of some disruption was not enough to override students' right to express political beliefs. However, the ruling was based on the principle that if the conduct by the student in the class or outside of the class disrupts classwork or involves substantial disorder or invasion of rights of others, it is not protected by the constitutional guarantee of freedom of speech, which goes back to what Cindy was talking about earlier, where you can't disrupt 2 days of class for something like that, but she could give the opportunity to do something after school as a club or something like that. That's all.
The other part of it, which you all know very well, just because a group of students ask for a particular club doesn't mean you have to do that. Sometimes you have to really think, what's the implication if we allow this? Are we opening ourselves up to having to allow anything? And that one of the things that has happened over the years, used to, community groups would ask schools to send home notices about maybe Halloween carnivals or summer activities. And so if you send home one, you have to send home all of them, regardless of what they may be. And I think, one of the things that came up was that a group of Wiccans wanted to send home something. Well, that really enraged people. So that's why a lot of schools would just cut out and say, we're not sending anything home. If if it goes home, it's something we have created. It's originated at the school. We're not sending community things out. And many times they won't even send Girl Scout and Boy Scout stuff out because of those same things. If you send one group out, you have to allow all of them. And so that's something that you picked up on that's really important there for you to do. Okay, is it group 2?
All right. So we obviously, so for case study 3, this is group 2. So we do not believe that her comments were a veiled threat. We do feel that maybe she should have urged the parents in a different direction because of parent demands. Just thinking about it, parent demands aren't always a great thing to have, but the parent actions could be a parent boycott, get involved more in the district, start a petition condemning the abomination, and then student-led petitions is a 4th option. The resolution urged parents to speak to their sons. I feel that that's always a good idea when you can put a little bit on the parents to help out at home. The Jimmy and Willie's resolutions, Diversity Day, a day of silence, and a gay-straight alliance. So under the law, bans on same-sex couples are unconstitutional, and as has already been stated, it infringes upon freedom of speech. We date back to 1980. Federal court upheld the senior allowing a same-sex date to the prom. The court also took into thought how other students might react. Next, the Supreme Court, they had federal court cases that affirm any policy for same-sex couples, proms, to attend together, dances. Lastly, anything telling them that they cannot happen would violate their First Amendment of the U.S. Constitutions. Lastly, federal court upheld a fundamental right to equal treatment in 2008 to a high school, Scottsboro, Alabama, that allowed 2 female students to attend the prom. Despite the fears, the presence of same-sex couples at school events are rarely disruptive. Where I work, we have a lot of that up here in Asheville, and I can tell it from a first-hand experience. Most people accept it and go on with their days. So she does need to respond to the concerns of the parents while explaining her responsibilities to the administrator. Responsibility of the principal is listed in the four paradigms of ethics. The first one.
Okay, you're good. I have been talking the whole time and I didn't hit unmute.
Okay.
You want me to do this one?
Absolutely. I just got the justice.
I was like, why is nobody hearing me? Okay, so sorry. So these 4 paradigms are listed, and this was pulled from the principal lesson plan template that was uploaded. So justice, which is just the fairness, justice standard. Then there's care, which is the loyalty and trust, concern and connection, that nurturing. Critique, so the morals, power, critical theories. And then profession, so accountability for student, academic, and social success. And you can see a little bit more of those items listed there. And then should Mary Lou allow Jim and Willie to attend the prom as a couple? We stated that yes, everyone has the right to take a same gender date to the prom or school dance as long as they continue to satisfy all the same rules that apply to different gender dates as well.
So then the question comes up, like, how do you address or minimize bullying with this entering in the school, and you already have parents adopting that concern? And I think just one understanding bullying, over 70% of our staff has witnessed it. 70% of young people identify that they've seen it happening. More than 80% of your staff or people that go there in the have seen bullying happen more than once. And 41% of people witness bullying happening during the week. And so I think that's a real concern once you start entering into this issue. And so there's some areas the principal needs to be aware of and to be addressing. The principal needs to be aware of the board policies in her county, and she needs to uphold those to the highest end in her school without wavering and being consistent on a daily basis. And then students need to be aware of this, aware of the policies and aware of the consequences. At our school, every semester we have a discipline meeting, and this is brought up, and we just suggest the principal continuing to explain this to her children so everyone is aware of the policies and the consequences of it. And then also dealing with instances immediately, fairly, consistently, and to be assertive in the situation. And as you have issues of any issues coming into the school, these are probably the best routes in order to minimize bullying from continuing or taking place in your school.
How would you address or minimize cyberbullying? This one's really big going into more schools are becoming one-to-one with technology. I know in Forsyth County they use bring your own device where kids can bring cell phones or their own devices in if they aren't allowed to have a Chromebook at school. And it's hard to manage that. They have to log into the system that the school, the Wi-Fi system there, so they kind of have a monitoring system there, but a lot of things go under the radar and kids can text each other. And I think it makes it more difficult for teachers to monitor those things, because if they have a cell phone in their hand, they can hide that and be discreet with it. Whereas with the computer, with the laptop up, you can walk around and monitor it that way. But cyberbullying includes text, social media, and email. And the statistics with that is in 2017 school crime supplement exit disclaimer icon indicates that among students 12 to 18 who reported being bullied at school during the school year, 15% were bullied online or by text. So that's just a small portion of that whole bullying umbrella. In another survey or surveillance system, it estimated 14.9% of high school students were electronically bullied in the 12 months prior to the survey. So I went and did a little digging because we covered this in one of our discussion boards. But my school system is very, very small. It's rural, and it has a very tiny snippet about the technology use of cyberbullying. It covers bullying, but a very small amount of cyberbullying. And I think it goes school by school how a principal will handle it and the consequences to it. And in the handbook, it lays out what an elementary student would go through, what a middle school student would go through, and what a high school student would go through. And it kind of levels off, because in elementary, you get an in-school discipline before you get suspended. And then in the upper grades, they get suspended before anything in school. They don't get anything in school done. And they probably lose their privileges of having the technology in their hands during the school day. And I also looked at ways to, as administrators, to bring this to their staff's attention. And it's just building a culture in the school and making everybody aware that bullying happens. And we all know that. And it's been a big thing that we've gone through over several years. And sometimes we think that parents also think things that are happening in the classroom are bullying, but it's not really bullying. And we have to have that discussion with them. So having that culture with the teachers at school, but also the families and the students as well, to really know what bullying looks like. And then building upon that with the clubs that we're talking about, and maybe having extra trainings for your staff to be sensitive to what bullying looks like and how to respond to that with students and families. And then this is the law that goes along with bullying in our state. It addresses bullying and harassing behavior. It is any pattern of gestures of written, electronic, or verbal communications, or a physical act or anything threatening communication that takes place on school property at any school-sponsored function or on a school bus.
Any questions?
y'all did a good job of covering the bullying and the cyberbullying, and that is one of the things that gets a lot of attention these days. And when you have the national news that gives examples of the cyberbullying and the bullying that has actually caused some kids to commit suicide, you know, that really makes you aware that you have got to be on top of those situations, because some children who are really, really sensitive take those things to heart. And if they don't have parents who pick up on what's going on, and for some reason it escapes the teachers, then there are some really bad outcomes from some of the situations that do occur. Hopefully none of you have been in a school where anything has been that bad, but you hear about it on the national news. Anybody else want to comment on the cyberbullying or bullying? Okay, we've got group 1.
All right, I'll go ahead. I'll go ahead and share it. Okay, and I'm going to let Shonda go ahead and get us started.
Well, I think we were very excited about both cases, so we kind of talked about a little about both of the cases. So we began with this case study. There was a couple on campus that are openly in a relationship that the parents and students do not approve of, which was Jimmy Jansen and Willie Larkin. Because of the nature of their relationship, parents have written letters, made phone calls, and emails about how the two boys should not show any type of affection on campus. Parents and students have called the boys different slurs, and that have jeopardized the boys' well-being, and parents have started to lead a boycott to get the boys out of the school and out of the school prom. So there's pressure on the school principal to handle the situation swiftly and in favor of the parents and students. The boys' parents are aware of the relationship and have no intention on taking the boys out of the school, as well as feeling as though their freedom of speech has been impaired because of the principal wanting the parents to talk sense into the boys. The boys also want to start a gay-straight alliance club to bring awareness and education to this situation. So there were some questions asked. The first one, would you consider Mary Lou's comments a veiled threat? And we think that Mary Lou may have been trying to protect the students by having them to cover up their situation, but in this specific case, she may be violating the law by trying to do that. And what are Mary Lou's responsibilities under the law? According to the law, her responsibility is to protect the students from discrimination, harassment, and abuse based upon their sexual orientation. How should Mary Lou respond to the concerns of Jerry and Cindy Hudson? She should respond to them carefully and in a way that protects the students and their rights, and she should educate them on the law and how she has to protect all of her students' rights. And should Mary Lou allow Jimmy and Willie to attend the prom as a couple to avoid a discrimination lawsuit or something? I feel that she should allow the students to attend the prom together.
All right, so then we had to discuss how to go about minimizing bullying and cyberbullying, and we know that both obviously take place in probably all school systems, but what we said here was that the administration and teaching staff need to try to create a positive school environment to encourage team building amongst the students so they can build stronger and more nurturing relationships, and environment that bullying will hopefully decline, because we know that in most schools, especially high school age students, there's a lot of different cliques and stuff and a lot of different groups, and some students will tend to bully other people from a different group because they don't necessarily fit in with that group, if that makes sense. And so instead of doing that, let's try to build those relationships and try to bring everybody together as one. Then the administration and teaching staff should have in-class discussions with students regarding bullying and cyberbullying, discuss, what are the signs of both, how and who do you report an incident to, and that it is okay to report these situations and not just keep quiet on it, and make sure you tell somebody about it. They could have student leaders such as student council bring awareness about bullying to the school, in an attempt to have more students report incidents and decrease the number of incidents within the school. Typically, I feel like if you have other students bringing up information about situations in the school that are taking place, students will listen to their peers more than they will the teaching staff. And then administration and teaching staff need to work with students of whom are doing the bullying and to ensure that there are specific policies set in place for those who are bullying others, and that these policy guidelines and interventions would be based on the severity of the incident that has occurred.
All right, so I guess I got the legal and ethical concerns here. And just to kind of piggyback also on what Nick was saying, you know, I think we had this topic for one of our activities, and I talked to my principal too. He says at the high school level, they have to meet almost every year and try to add things to the cyberbullying policy because it just changes so much, and it's difficult to know if it carries over on weekends or holidays. You know, how do you react to that? So he told me, you know, a lot of things you have to do is, does this have a chance to manifest itself? If it happens over the weekend or happens over the holiday, that's what you really have to look at too. So I thought that was interesting there. But some of the legal and ethical concerns, I looked at some of the laws, and you know, there's a lot of things where maybe some of it comes short here because all 50 states have the laws and regulations to prevent cyberbullying. As we're kind of seeing through this case study here, it kind of varies from school to school, district to district, or at the high school level, middle school, and even elementary as well. So these policies and regulation include bullying and its characteristics, how to define it, all right? But some of the concerns are they might not be specific enough, all right? And also very few states classify cyberbullying as an actual criminal offense. So North Carolina, all right, does not require parent involvement. So that's, again, we get into the different schools may include it, they may not, it depends on their own policy there. And also, they also want to look at some of the legal aspects of putting safeguards for mental health and support for other students that may be involved or victims of cyberbullying as well. So some of the information we came up with there.
Okay, you all brought up a good point about the parent involvement. But remember, there are some situations that the parents can make things worse. And I think I may have told you this, but when well, maybe not. When we were discussing discipline earlier in the semester, there was a situation, you just have to use common sense. The law cannot come up with an answer for everything that occurs. So sometimes there just has to be some good common sense. And you need some people you can talk to that you trust their judgment to make sure you're seeing things correctly too. But they also need to be people who will keep things confidential. But we had some parents that we had a rule when I was principal. We had a rule that whenever the children did something at school that was, after so many times, we contacted the parents and let them know what was going on and asked for their help. Well, we did that. The teacher did that. And the next day, the child came back to school and the child was bruised all over because the parents had beat him. Well, that's all they knew. They did not know any other method of discipline. All they knew was to beat them because that's what had happened to them when they were growing up. And so that's what they did when the teacher asked for help. And so we ultimately had to turn them over to DSS, which didn't help in the school and parent relationship at any way, but it was something that we had to do because we had to look after the health of that child. So the teacher and I talked, and I told her, I said, I don't care what this kid does, as long as I'm here and you're here, we're never calling these parents again. We will figure out some form of discipline to handle this child and any of the brothers and sisters that it has, because they don't have the skills to deal with children in an appropriate manner, and we're not going to do that. So you will wind up in situations sometimes that, especially when you're dealing, well, with any age, but these happen to be small children, that just break your heart. And then because you asked for the parents' help, you also wound up having to call in another agency, and then that just puts another division between you and the parents. So, you know, the cyberbullying, the bullying, those are all going to be issues that could backfire. Just like, I don't even remember what the child did, but he was constantly doing something. And so we had reached step 3 or whatever it was, and that step was call the parents and let them know what was happening and just ask for their help. But we quickly learned with that family we could not do that. And it wasn't that the parents were trying to be mean, they were trying to help us. They were doing all they knew. And so I think you have to, you know, once we learned that about them, we knew what not to do. And we figured out we could do whatever we needed to get those children to behave, because they weren't mean children. They were just little boys, and they were moving, you know, that kind of thing. So you will run into those kinds of things, and that's where good common sense comes in. And sometimes you have your policies that you follow, but at the same time, when you know of situations that it's going to harm the child's health, then you look for other ways around it to still discipline the child, but to help improve the child's behavior, but not to get them hurt. So I just wanted to remind you that sometimes that when we're asking and dealing with parents, we don't get the result we want. We get a bad result. And it can be both ways. You can have parents who are too much of a hovering parent, and they don't let the child grow up on their own. And then you can have parents like the group I'm talking about with, that just didn't have the skills to know how to help children improve. Somewhere in the middle, there is the place that you want the parents to be, to allow the kids to make mistakes on their own in a controlled environment, so that when they get to be adults, they will make better decisions. As you all were making your presentations, and all of you did a good job, one of the things that I wrote down was, where do guidance counselors fit in? Do any of your policies have anything about getting the help of the guidance counselors, either with the ones that's doing the bullying or the ones that's the target of the bullying?
Yeah, one of the things that I realized too, that I didn't realize before doing a lot of this internship hours, was just how much, at least at the high school, I'm probably sure it's the same as the others, but how much they're involved. And some other student here talked about how they have them on the Wi-Fi so they can monitor. They do that here too. So even if they're sending emails, like the student concern specialist and a lot of the guidance department, if there's certain keywords that kind of show up that they have targeted, the guidance counselors see that stuff, and then sometimes they determine whether or not they have to bring the student in. Or it could be the other way around. An incident gets brought to an assistant principal, and then they let the guidance get involved and they do some questioning, because sometimes they may be more open to talking to a guidance counselor compared to an administrator. And then that could manifest itself to see if you have to bring it to an SRO. But I was surprised. I knew they were involved. I just didn't realize how hands-on they actually were.
And I used to use guidance counselors if I saw the same child for 2 to 3 times for similar offenses. Then I would send my guidance counselor a note and say, I want you to work with this particular student on whatever it was that I was seeing them for. They need some help in getting their behavior under control. And so she just knew to expect a note from me after I'd seen these students a couple of times for some kind of misbehavior. And it didn't have to be big stuff. You know, a lot of times it was fussing. It was getting in word fights because we would catch the fights. We didn't let them get into a fight, but it'd be a word fight. And so once we did that, then, you know, she had a better, because she wasn't the disciplinarian, she could talk with them and work with them in a different way to try to work on the skills. And sometimes she would put together small groups of students who were having the same kind of issues. And I would see them, her office was right behind mine. And I would see them getting together in a corner of the library, and she'd be talking with them. So I think we have to look for as much preventive as we do looking at punishment, because our end goal is, you know, we're there, as one of you all brought out, in the protection of the children. We're there in loco parentis. And so we've got to look after all the children, not just the ones we think like or the ones we feel are behaving correctly. We've got to look after all of them. I used to laugh, and whenever we would go on field trips, if we had a group of students and we were going out of overnight, then we always sent a school administrator along. And I always got the little boys who were just little devils, but they were precious. And I would, you know, keep them right with me the whole time, and they didn't get in any trouble, you know. But you do that out of prevention. You don't wait till something happens. You do it before it happens, and you know the kids that are going to be rambunctious. You know the kids that don't ever get to go anywhere, and they might go explore on their own. So you put somebody extra with them. Sometimes you may want to take some parents along, but you have to know your parents and make sure that the parents don't have any legal issues that going to put children in danger. So, but you can do that. You know, you're going to know your kids and their parents, and so you know whether some of them can go and help you look after some of these children. If not, see if you can take a guidance counselor or an assistant principal or somebody else along to make sure that your kids don't get in any trouble. And you don't want that. You want them to have fun. You want them to learn. That's the reason you take field trips. Some of you brought out that you are dealing with bullying and cyberbullying almost every year. There's some of it. Is it happening a lot, or is it sort of like years ago, he said this about me, she said this about me, and it's not really to worry, but it just happens and you just got to deal with it?
I would agree with that. I teach middle school, so it's a lot of that drama with, you know, he said this about me, and, you know, last night on, you know, Snapchat, they posted this, and this. And so I'm always cautious to use the term bullying because to me it's overused and overstated. Because you really need to go back to what the definition of bullying is. And it's a pattern. It's a pattern of events or actions that have taken place. So, you know, I was talking to Brian and Anthony last week when we were meeting. It's amazing to me to see, because I'm working with elementary students some this summer, and first grade, they're coming up, he's bullying me, you know. I'm just really surprised to see that, because
it's a new buzzword.
Right. That's exactly what it is. So I'm just, like I said, I'm cautious to use it because that's the first thing a parent's going to call and say, that my child's being bullied. And so, you know, they call and they're most of the time upset. So I try to not use it. I try to, you know, work my way around that word. And sometimes it causes for, you know, some type of mini investigation to take place. You know, well, what actually has happened? You know, is it something that has been repetitive, or is this just a one-time thing where, you know, it's just a little disagreement? So That's my.
And I agree with you, Alan. We can escalate things sometimes instead of get them under control, and we can make them worse by the way we react. That's one of the reasons I always tell my students, the world can be falling apart around you, but you're going to act cool and calm. I don't care what your insides are saying, because if you start showing emotion, your teachers pick up on it, and your children will too, and your whole school will be in a mess. So it doesn't matter what all is happening around you. You've got to look cool, calm, and collected. Like, okay, we deal with this every day, and we're just going to move right along, and we're not going to get excited. Now, you can be as excited as you want to on the inside. You just can't show it, because you've got to maintain that I can handle this, and to give your teachers confidence in you, and to give the parents and the children confidence in you. So you just have to maintain a calm. That was one of the things that, as I look back on the years that I was a principal and assistant principal and assistant superintendent, for some reason I was able to do that. I was able to, even though I was nervous inside, I was able to not show it. And so whenever we had things that happened that were unusual, such as bomb threats frequently and those kinds of things that happened to us one year, I just would go to that school and I would be just very calm, and the principal knew I was there, and I didn't try to take over. I was an extra set of hands to help that principal. And my central office, we would send them, if we had a period of time where we had bomb threats at 4 or 5 schools at a time. And so I would send various ones to various schools. And as long as we remained calm and could keep our principals calm, everything went smoothly. But we had one school that we didn't get there as quickly as we needed to. And the principal got excited. Well, we got all kinds of questions about, well, you didn't do this, and you didn't do this, and you didn't do that. That was the only school we had those things to happen from. So it was because the principal did not keep calm and allowed the teachers to get a little too excited. And it was just a bomb threat being called in by somebody who wanted to make our lives miserable for a while. And they did. They never did catch them, but they stopped as soon as we had our Easter break. So that was, and they got real close. They got the cell tower that the calls were bouncing off of. So they figured out the approximate area that they were being called from, but they still were never able to get them. So you just get into all kinds of things. One of the questions I have for you to think about is, when you deal with a situation that's illegal but different from your personal beliefs, how do you feel about that? And I'm really proud of all of you all. You all did not stick your personal beliefs in there. You did what the law said you were supposed to do. I had a group earlier that really conflicted over their personal beliefs about homosexuality. And I think the case study really opened their eyes to the fact that when you're in a school administration role, especially in a public school setting, you got to take your personal beliefs to yourself, and then you've got to look at the law, and you've got to handle the law. But how does it make you feel when your personal beliefs are different from what the law says you're supposed to be doing? It will happen.
Isn't that one of those situations where you go in knowing fully well that you're going to have to do things even though you don't absolutely believe in them? So you just do, knowing that that's what's supposed to happen?
Yeah, you do. And you may have an inner conflict, and you can talk about it with that one person that will keep things confidential, but you still do your job. And your job is always to protect all the children. You're there in the absence of the parent, and you're to do what is right for the children and what's constitutional. Where do your personal beliefs fit in with your role as a school administrator?
I think your personal beliefs are just that, like the basic things, like just treating people with kindness and just how you treat people, with you treating them with respect, and just not talking about. I've had principals where they would tell me things in confidence, but they would say it about other teachers, and I'm thinking, this is so unprofessional.
That's not right. You're right.
Yeah. So just knowing just who you are as a person, just treating people with the respect that you would want them to treat you with.
And I think the way you treat others shows who you are, regardless of what you say. And I think that's what you do. Just be aware that when you're a school administrator, people look at you differently, and people you thought were your friends will question what you're doing and why you're doing it. And, you know, I don't know that I was quite prepared for that, but in many ways, the path that my jobs took, I went to a new place for different positions. So it was not like working in the same school and being there as a teacher and then moving into as an assistant principal. I think it's a lot easier when you go to a new place and they don't know you as the teacher you taught next to. But, you know, some people are very successful with that. Other people have a difficult time with that. But it worked to my advantage when I was moved from my teaching position in one school to a different school as an assistant principal. And then I moved to a different school as the principal, and then to a different system as the assistant superintendent. And then I stayed in the same system as the superintendent where I was an assistant. But my job duties, enough people had gotten to know me by then, I wasn't new. And so one of the things you also have to be careful of and be aware of, I'm one of these people that I tell you what I think. I don't have a hidden agenda. You know, if I tell you I want you to do task one, this, I'm not trying to get you to do anything else but exactly what I said. And I'm looking right straight at the rubric. And that's a poor example. But, you know, my principals evidently were so used to having people deal with them with a hidden agenda, they didn't know how to take it when I told them exactly what I wanted. And so they kept looking for hidden agendas. And and they wouldn't talk to me about it. They would talk to someone who worked under me that they knew she was a friend, but they also knew they could get her to talk to me about it. And that just always surprised me, that rather than just assume that you're telling it straightforward, that people are looking for hidden agendas. But be prepared for that, because sometimes in some systems it happens more so than in others. You know, in the first system I worked in, it did not happen, but it happened more in the second system I worked in. So I guess it's the culture of the community and the culture of the people who work together. Hopefully we changed the culture and they realized that by the time I left, that, you know, well, she's telling us exactly what she wants us to do. She's telling us exactly the way she sees it. She doesn't have a hidden agenda. And when I would talk with them about that, I said, look, I have 15 things that come to me at one time. I don't have time to try to think through and come up with a hidden agenda. Why would I have that kind of time? And it's the same thing that you as teachers get accused of. Well, he's picking on my child. You know, it's the same kind of thing. You don't have time to pick on one child. You've got too many of them coming at you with lots of different things. But those are the kinds of things that happen. And so you just be prepared and don't be blindsided by it. And what are some of the personal beliefs that should guide you? We hit on it, but when you're dealing with a really difficult situation, what are some of the personal beliefs that should guide you?
I think you hit the one that you talked about as kind of hit me the most is because I've had kids that have been very not abused by their parents, but been you know that if you say something to that parent, that child is going to be disciplined in a way that's inappropriate. And so just knowing that you want to take care of those children, that you're kind of like their second parent, and you want to do what's best for those kids. And sometimes that may mean not communicating with the parent the way that you would like to be able to.
And you're correct on that. And I think you also mentioned kindness. And, one of the guiding principles is to treat others as you would want to be treated. And I think most of you would have that as one of the principles that would guide you. I can remember a situation that I had where my assistant superintendent and I had to call a teacher in. And it wasn't a pleasant situation. But he thanked us for the way we talked to him and dealt with him. And it was a sad situation. And the teacher had done nothing wrong, but he was being accused of some things, and because of who it was, he wouldn't fight it. And, we had to ask questions and all that kind of stuff because it had been out in the community. But he thanked us for being kind to him as dealing with the issue. Well, we should be kind to people regardless of what the situation is that we're dealing with. So I just wanted you to think about those kinds of things as you're looking at these case studies. These case studies are getting you to think about situations you may wind up dealing with at some point in your career. All right, the next thing, and I know we're out of time, and I'm going to be very quick. I wrote it out because I was afraid we'd run out of time. I think the first task that you'll be working on this summer will be the first artifact will be, not the summer, but the fall will be the SCIP. And it's where you do an organizational analysis. And what I have done on your agenda is I've highlighted what it's looking at. So in prompt 1, you're looking for gaps in communication, and you're looking at it in 2 groups. Internal is those people who work in your school, they're in your school all the time. External would be anyone who's outside that comes into the school and still has links to the school, such as your parents, your business community, and those kinds of things. So that's what you're doing with that. And one of the things that I always recommend is remember your evaluators have the rubric. The rubric goes through task 1, task 2, task 3, and task 4. This is not the time to be creative. This is the time you follow exactly what the rubric says. I would label it task 1, and then I would put the subheadings for background description, statement of purpose, who participated. That way they know it's there. They're not hunting for it. They find it quickly. And then task 2, I'd put whatever that is, resource identification, because I went ahead and did that. Then the second prompt for task 1 is you're analyzing regarding your school leadership, and you're identifying the strengths and the weaknesses of the school leadership. Now, in some of these situations, if your principals wind up realizing what you're doing, they may get a little bit nervous about it. We've had that happen in the past. So, but you can use the teacher working conditions survey information. If you've had to do some kind of survey for Title I, you're not expected to recreate. You're expected to use what you've got. If you don't have anything, then you can take some of the same questions that deals with the school leadership section from the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. And South Carolina has a component in one of theirs, but I can't remember what it's called, that they can use in the place of the North Carolina Teacher Working Conditions Survey. And then the resource identification, you're looking for fiscal, meaning the money, and human, meaning the people in your school. So those are the things that you're looking for, and you're looking for short-term and long-term objectives. You're looking for resources that will sustain it, and you're looking at the human piece that's going to help you do it. So I wanted to get that introduced in case some of you all are one of the best groups I have had in, I want to say at least a year and a half, because I have not had to beg you to turn your work in. I've not had to send in reminders 3 to 4 times to tell you to get it done. You're just on the ball, and that's exactly the kind of person that we need as a school administrator. So I appreciate you a whole lot, and I hope you realize that. So you've done a really good job, and we only have one more session, and it is dealing with case study 4, which is special ed. So I will, if one group wants to go first, if you'll let me know in an email, I'll put you first. Otherwise, I'll probably start in the middle, because I've done 3 and then 1, 2, 3, and then I did 4, 3, 2, 1 this time. So if there's a group that wants to go first, let me know, and otherwise I'll just have you do that. All right, any other questions or anything for tonight? Thank you for joining me. Have a great week, and I hope you get some relief from the heat, but I dislike cold so badly that I love the summer. So have a great week.
Okay.